Nate had been part of our friend group since college. The loud one, always first to grab a camera, always cracking jokes that landed a beat too late but somehow still worked. That weekend, at a lake 3 hours out of town, we took close to 40 photos across 4 different phones. Group shots by the fire, a dumb jump off the dock, a lazy, half-asleep afternoon photo of all 6 of us sprawled across the grass. Nate isn't in a single one. Not blurred, not turned away, not cropped out by accident. Every photo shows exactly 5 people, arranged in a formation that only makes sense with a 6th person standing in the obvious gap. A gap that's clearly, visibly empty in every frame, with a shadow on the ground that doesn't match anyone actually visible in the shot. None of us noticed until we got home. My phone showed 5. My friend Priya's phone, same moments, same photos, also 5. We called each other, laughing about it at first, assuming some strange settings glitch none of us could quite explain away. The night before we packed up, sitting around the fire, Nate had said something none of us thought much of at the time. He mentioned, casually, that the lake remembered things that went in the water and didn't come back out. And laughed right after, the way you do with a throwaway campfire line meant to spook people a little. Priya brought it up again on our call, her voice noticeably tighter than before. None of us could remember him ever being the type to say something like that. It didn't sound like his usual jokes. It didn't sound, thinking back on it now, entirely like him at all. Then Priya asked the question none of us wanted to answer. Did anyone have Nate's number saved anywhere besides their contacts? Not one of us did. And when we finally checked, the number saved under his name had been disconnected, according to every carrier, for at least 2 years. We drove back to that lake 2 months later, needing to make sense of something none of us could otherwise explain. A park ranger, listening to us describe him, his build, his laugh, even a small scar on his jaw one of us mentioned without thinking, went completely still, then told us the description matched a hiker reported missing from that exact lake 11 years earlier. Never found. Case still open. We didn't get an explanation. We got a name, a date, and a file that's technically still active. None of us has said his name out loud since we left that ranger station. And none of us, not one, has deleted a single photo from that weekend. I live on the 3rd floor of an older converted building, 4 units per floor, standard layout. Directly beneath my unit should be Unit 2B. I know this because I asked for the building's floor plan when I first signed the lease, the way you do when you're deciding where to put furniture. The floor plan shows 2B as a closet-sized utility space. Electrical panels, nothing habitable. No windows, no door large enough for a person to comfortably fit through. For 6 months, almost every night around 11 p.m., I've heard footsteps directly beneath my bedroom. Slow, deliberate, back and forth. The specific creak of someone shifting their weight from one floorboard to another in a space that, according to the building itself, isn't big enough to walk 3 full steps in any direction. I mentioned it to my building super, expecting an easy explanation. A maintenance worker, a plumbing issue, anything ordinary. He told me, a little too quickly, that 2B has been sealed since before he started working there, and that he'd personally never been inside it, only past it, and that he preferred to keep it that way. I pushed. He eventually admitted that the seal wasn't structural. It was a decision made by building management, documented nowhere he'd ever been shown, just quietly enforced as an unspoken rule among staff. Nobody goes into 2B. Nobody talks about 2B. New staff simply get told early on to leave it alone, the way you'd tell someone not to touch a specific switch without needing to explain why. The elderly tenant, when I finally worked up the nerve to ask her directly, told me one more detail before changing the subject entirely, her hands visibly unsteady around her teacup as she said it. She said the last occupant of 2B had been found by a neighbor, decades ago, kneeling in the center of that small room facing the wall, unresponsive but alive, and that no amount of questioning afterward ever produced an explanation from him for how long he'd been like that, or why every clock in the unit had been found stopped at the exact same minute. 3 weeks ago, the footsteps changed. For the first time in 6 months, whatever's down there stopped near the exact spot below my bed and stayed still for almost 11 minutes, motionless, before slowly moving away again. I've since learned from an elderly tenant who's lived here since the building's original conversion decades ago that 2B used to be a full unit, occupied, before something happened there that she refused to describe in any real detail beyond saying, quietly, "They sealed it for a reason, and it wasn't asbestos." I still hear it most nights. I've started sleeping with a white noise machine, not because it helps me sleep, but because some nights, I'd genuinely rather not know exactly when it stops pacing and goes still again. I worked night security at a storage facility. The job was about as uneventful as security work gets. Walk the rows every 2 hours, check that units were properly locked, log anything unusual, which in 18 months meant logging almost nothing. Unit 213 came up on my very first walk, listed vacant in the system, no tenant on file, empty since before I started. Standard padlock, cold to the touch, same as every other empty unit. 6 weeks in, doing my usual 2 a.m. round, I touched that same lock out of habit, and it was warm. Not sun warm. There was no sun, it was 2 in the morning. Warm the way metal gets from being handled, gripped, held onto by something with body heat. I logged it, assuming a maintenance oversight, and mentioned it to my supervisor the next morning. He checked the system, confirmed the unit was vacant, and told me to log it again if it happened twice. It happened the following night, and the night after that. Always around 2 a.m., always only that lock, every other unit in the row ice cold the way an unheated storage building should be at that hour. I started timing my rounds specifically to catch whatever was doing it. On the 9th night, I got there just as the lock cooled from warm back to cold in real time, under my own hand, like something had let go of it the exact moment my flashlight beam hit the door. I requested access to check inside, which took 2 weeks of paperwork given the vacant status made it technically not my call. When maintenance finally opened it with me present, the unit was completely empty, swept clean. No boxes, no furniture, nothing, except a single folding chair, positioned in the exact center of the unit, facing the door. The facility's records show no tenant ever assigned to 213 in the 11 years the system has existed. The chair had no dust on it, in a unit that, according to every log, hadn't been opened by a single authorized person in over a decade. I remember the maintenance worker crouching down beside it, running a finger along the seat, and going quiet in a way that made the whole room feel smaller. He pointed out, without needing to say much else, that the seat itself was faintly warm, the same specific warmth I'd been feeling in that padlock for weeks, as though whatever usually sat there had only just stood up the moment the door finally opened. I quit 2 months later. I still don't know who's been sitting in that chair, facing that door, waiting for someone to finally open it. My street is quiet, the kind where everyone knows which houses are occupied and which aren't. The Hendricks place, 2 doors down, has sat empty since the last owner passed away 6 years ago. Overgrown yard, faded "for sale" sign nobody's bothered to remove, mail that stopped coming years ago. Everyone on the street refers to it the same way, the empty house. For the past 4 months, every day around 3:15 in the afternoon, without fail, I've seen a man standing in the front window, waving. Not frantically, calmly, almost warmly, the way you'd wave at a neighbor you recognized. I mentioned it to 2 other neighbors, assuming maybe a realtor was doing walkthroughs or squatters had moved in. Both of them looked at me strangely. Both of them said they'd seen him too. Same window, same time, same wave, for months. Each of them individually assuming, the way I had, that someone else must already know who he was and why he was there. None of us had ever called it in. None of us had ever gotten close enough to see his face clearly, because something about the timing, always exactly 3:15, never a minute earlier or later, made it feel less like something to investigate and more like something to simply not look at too directly. One neighbor, the one who lived closest with the clearest sightline into that window, finally admitted something the rest of us hadn't pressed her on. She said that from her angle, close enough to make out real detail, his wave never actually changed. Same hand position, same slight tilt of the head, frame after frame, day after day, like watching the same 3 seconds of film looped rather than an actual person standing there, choosing to wave at her fresh each time. I finally called the police after 4 months, more out of growing unease than any specific incident. Officers checked the house thoroughly. Doors locked, windows sealed from the inside, dust undisturbed on every surface, no sign of entry anywhere. No one inside, no one had been inside based on the dust alone, in years. I asked the officer, half joking to cover how unsettled I actually was, whether he'd checked the time. He hadn't thought to. It was 3:12 p.m. when they entered. I watched from my porch as they cleared the house room by room, and at 3:15 exactly, through my own window, I saw him again, standing in that same front window, waving, while 2 uniformed officers stood in that same empty room, seeing nothing at all. It was one of those overnight call-in shows people listen to on long drives or when they can't sleep. Mostly harmless stuff, local news, occasional ghost stories. I called in around 1 a.m., half joking, to share a minor weird noise I'd heard earlier that week, expecting 30 seconds of airtime and nothing more. The host, a woman with an easy, practiced radio voice, asked casually where I was calling from. I gave my general neighborhood, nothing specific. She paused, oddly long for live radio, then said, "You're in the kitchen right now, aren't you? Standing near the window that doesn't quite close all the way." I was. Exactly that. A window in my kitchen that's never sealed properly no matter how many times I've adjusted it. Something I'd never mentioned to anyone, let alone a stranger on a call-in radio show at 1 in the morning. I laughed it off on air, assuming a lucky guess, and she continued, her voice still calm, still that same practiced radio warmth. "There's a hallway to your left. Second door on the right is slightly open. You closed it before you called." I had. I'd closed it out of habit 20 minutes earlier, a habit so automatic I hadn't consciously thought about it since. I stopped laughing. I asked her, my own voice noticeably tighter now, how she could possibly know any of that. She didn't answer right away. In the silence before she spoke again, I heard something underneath her voice on the line, faint, almost buried in the audio, but unmistakably there once I noticed it. The exact sound of my own kitchen window, the one that never quite closes, shifting slightly in its frame, transmitted back to me through the phone a half second before I heard the real sound behind me in the actual room. She didn't answer the question. Instead, still in that same calm, unhurried tone, she said, "You should go check that door again before you hang up." Then, without any further explanation, she thanked me for calling and moved on to the next caller, exactly the way she had with everyone before me, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. I checked the door. It was open again. The same door I'd closed 20 minutes earlier, the same door no one else has a key to, in an apartment I live in completely alone. I tried calling the station back within the hour. The number that had connected me minutes earlier now rang through to a disconnected line. I've since learned the show I called into that night wasn't actually airing anywhere that evening. It had been preempted by network maintenance, confirmed by 3 separate people who checked their own radios at the exact time I called in. I don't know who I was talking to, or what was listening closely enough to know exactly where I was standing in my own home. I know the door hasn't stayed closed on its own since.